All right. Hello, everybody. This is Denise Taylor, and welcome to our January Love Talk. I'm so excited to be broadcasting today and partnering with Dana, who we will allow to introduce herself in just a second. We're hoping that this technology is easy for everyone to use, and it's a great platform to allow you to see us and for us to engage with you. First of all, I just want to thank you guys for being a part of the First Wives Club. Our mission and desire is one, to help support wives to thrive in their marriage. And we're just really excited to be able to share, to motivate, to inspire, and certainly to get people connected with their families, their mates, and just keep families intact. That's our ultimate goal. I had the opportunity of meeting Dana, and it's been a pleasure ever since the first time we met. We saw that a lot of our interests and passions around wives were in sync with one another. And I'm hopeful that this partnership will continue to forge as we go further in trying to be an inspiration to all. So without further ado, I want to give Dana a chance to introduce herself, to give us some insight into her experience and credibility. I know I posted in the group and kind of introduced her a little, but she brings so much more to the table. So with that, Dana, tell us a little bit about you.
So hi guys, my name is Dana Alexander Thomas. I have been married for 11 years. I've been with my husband since I was 21 years old. So we've been together for a total of 21 years. I have 3 children, ages 20, 10, and 13. I currently work in the field of therapy. My credentials include, I'm considered right now a qualified mental health therapist. And what that means is that I am in a process of licensure. We have to have so many supervision hours. We have to have internships, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm basically working under my supervisor's license until I can be fully licensed.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for telling us about that. So in addition, I think one of the things that I thought was really powerful was not only your experience as a wife and having been married 11 years, but also your professional experience. Mm-hmm. And you not only have your bachelor's, you have your master's, which is just awesome. You're helping to change lives every day with the therapy that you're doing. So I'm really excited to have you be a part of our team. And thank you for saying yes when I begged you to do it. So thank you so much. All right, so we'll just jump in. How about that? Okay, because this is the First Wives Club, it's important to me that you had a perspective and understanding from a wife's perspective. Tell us about your marriage.
So I would say my marriage initially was based off friendship. Me and my husband were friends for 2 years before we actually started dating. He was not my type. He did not meet the criteria that I had for a husband, but seeing him in that friendship level, I knew that if he could be my friend, he would be a good husband. That's what my thought process was. We were married for 8 years. Everything was going well. We had our last 2 children, and then we experienced a couple losses. And at that time, when we experienced those losses, because they were very significant, it kind of made us distant. So me noticing the distance, I kind of tried to use my clinical skills, because I know my husband is a very quiet, laid back person. He is not going to therapy. So what we did, we started focusing on the more positive aspects of our marriage. What's going well versus, and not necessarily focusing on what's going wrong. It's not that we put it in the bag, we just kind of put a hold on it so we can manage it later, if that makes sense.
Oh, that absolutely makes sense.
Yes. So once we started changing our mindset, because a lot of times we get so stuck in our marriage, we get stuck in our routines, and we think that the way we've been thinking is the only way. But once we started to change our mindsets and look at things a little different, that's when everything else around us started to change. And that made a huge impact, because even though it wasn't noticeable, Our children could feel it. It was felt at work, even though it was silent, but it was there. So we had to just take that all in account, that what we're doing is affecting our family. And I'm a relationship person, and so is he. So we knew ain't no going nowhere. We're not going anywhere. We're gonna stay. We're gonna stick this out. We're gonna fight. We're gonna fight this out, because this was the first time that we ever actually had difficulties. I know that sounds very strange, but we really had a good relationship up until 8 years after our marriage.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so how did therapy from your perspective come into play? Because I know you probably leverage some of your skills and your experiences. But from a general standpoint, how did you take the philosophy of things that you knew, and how did you allow that to come into play to help you in your marriage?
So basically what I did, I know you have the book, so it kind of tells you a little bit about what we kind of did for the 30 days. So I decided to do a 30-day challenge with my husband. And each day it was something different, whether it was communication, it was support, it was talking about our love languages, and just setting intentions every morning. When we get up in the morning, our intentions is, you got this, or today is going to be a better day than it was yesterday. So that's what I use as far as my clinical skills. Once you start practicing it every day, it comes naturally, or it came natural for us. And then we set goals every day. Okay, by the end of the week, we're going to send 3 text messages this week, just telling each other how much we appreciate each other.
Wow.
And we will follow that. And then at the end of the week, we will evaluate it. How did that work? How did that make you feel? Et cetera, et cetera. Because our problem was more communication.
Gotcha.
And being able to communicate effectively.
Okay, that's very key, because you honed in on it. And what I like from what you said is the intentionality of every day making a decision and choice about what it was you guys wanted to focus on and do. All right, so I know it's a little bit taboo, but as a therapist yourself, have you been in therapy? Have you used therapy to your own advantage? Because there's always this myth out there that therapy is for the people who are deranged or insane. And, a lot of people are talking about self-care now and different things as it relates to that. So from your perspective as a therapist, how did that work for you?
So believe it or not, it's not actually taboo.
Okay.
When we're in school, when we're getting our master's, our professors always say this statement: your best therapist has their own therapist. And the reason why that is so important is because not only, are we therapists, we have our own stuff. We go into these sessions with our own stuff, with our own life changes. And for someone to come in, let's say, for example, if I had a client come in and if I have dealt with some trauma, and she comes in and she has dealt with trauma, but my trauma is unresolved, I'm going to do more hurt to her than helping her.
Gotcha.
So we go through a lot of things during school where we have to practice counseling skills with our professors, and we have to see somebody. So it's not really taboo. And then 2, we've taken on everybody else's problems and issues. That's part of our self-care. That's number 1 on the list. If you feel like you need some therapy or it's becoming overwhelming for you, you need to go to EAP. So I always say your best therapist has a therapist. And I have had therapy before. I went to therapy in reference to the marital difficulties that I was having individually. So we didn't have to go to marriage counseling. It was for my individual purposes. And also my son becoming very sick, very ill, and almost passing away. I was grieving that. So I had to go because I was no longer effective to my clients at work. So when I was that person, even though I know your best therapist has a therapist, I was like, I'm not going to see no therapy. I am the therapist. I had that attitude, but it was life changing for me. And I will tell anybody, go. if you feel like you need to go.
What are some signs that, because like I said, it seems to be part of the buzzword now, self-care. You hear that a lot, propagated, especially through social media. You hear from celebrities. What are some indications that therapy may be a solution, like that it may be something that someone really needs to give consideration to? And then secondarily to that, when they're trying to evaluate a good therapist for themselves, right? And you're like, okay, I want to go. Like, what are some things that they should take into consideration or do when they kind of get to the point where they're like, okay, I need a therapist. How do I make sure I'm finding one that can help me the right way?
Okay. So I'm sorry, I dropped the phone. So do you want to know about if they need to go to marriage therapy or individual therapy?
Both. Take us through both.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with marriage therapy first. So you would need to go to marriage therapy if you guys are not talking, or if you're talking and everything is negative, or if you find that you or your spouse keeping secrets, if you're contemplating an affair, whether it's emotional, physical, if you are financially unfaithful, which is something a lot of people don't talk about. We kind of laugh and joke about it
that way.
Yeah. So we laugh and joke about it a lot. You know how some of us, me included, I'll buy some shoes and I'll wait for the package to come and then I hide it up under the bed so my husband doesn't see it. It's considered to be financially unfaithful.
Gosh.
You will need to go to marriage counseling if you withhold affection as a punishment. Like if I came home and I didn't fold the clothes and my husband's mad at me, he won't give me a hug. That's an example of it. So that's when you would need to go to counseling. If you're not having sex, you may need to go to counseling. If you fight too much or you never have an argument or a disagreement, you may need to go to therapy. It may be a communication issue. If you feel like you guys are drifting apart, or if you feel like you have had losses, if you have had losses, and that can include job loss, grief, like a family member, loss of home, like homelessness, loss of your ability to take care of yourself, due to medical problems, you may need to go to therapy, or marriage therapy. Individual therapy. This is you individually based. So that's you and a therapist, and we have signs that we need to go to therapy before we actually hit that crisis mode. So some things that you should pay attention to or look for is if you're sleeping too much.
Really? Okay.
Yes, if you're sleeping too much or you're not sleeping at all. If you find yourself anxious all the time. If you're having ruminating or racing thoughts, and what that means is, like, say if something happened at work earlier that day, it's over with, but you get home and you can't sleep because that thought is continued going. It's like a hamster on a wheel. To give you a picture of it. So those are the ruminating, racing thoughts. If you're suspicious of others, paranoid, if you're eating too much or not eating enough, if you are withdrawn from family or friends, like you're not finding joy in things that you used to find joy in, you would probably need to see a therapist. If you experience some trauma, that could be physical, emotional, sexual, or verbal abuse, you probably would need to see a therapist. Also, if that trauma has caused you to have like nightmares, you will need to see an individual therapist. Okay. So those are just some things to look out for.
Oh my. I mean, you touched on every transition in life.
One more thing. Also, anger.
Okay.
A lot of people think depression is just sadness. So if you find yourself angry all the time, it could be depression or it could be anxiety. Okay. Because depression is not always sad. Some of the most depressed people could be the people that smile all the time and laugh all the time because they're trying to divert the attention from how they really feel inside.
Gotcha.
So those are just things to be mindful of.
Okay, so that's a hardy list, right? So if I say to you, I can identify with a couple of things on there and I'm not able to process out of it, and I want to now go and seek therapist help, right? And I can get past the stigma, because culturally there's always that stigma about somebody who's going to a therapist. Although I think in recent years it's become more accepted, right? What do I look for? What kind, it just seems like, I know some people, they only want a male or a female, and they only want this. Like, they have all of this criteria. It's almost like a dating list, if you will, but they have a lot of criteria. So what should they really be looking for?
So I'm just going to use myself for an example. When I go word of mouth. So let's say my cousin went to therapy and I knew about it. I'd be like, who did you use? And then I would look that person up. I would do my research. I would look at the reviews of what her clients or anonymous clients is saying about them, because it's all anonymous due to HIPAA. I would call and interview that therapist and ask questions. That way, if your needs are going to be met. You know what you're looking for. You best. So I always encourage, call the offices, ask to speak to that clinician, or have that clinician call you back and ask questions. Also, if you go to Psychology Today, or if you Google counselors in your area, they have a list of counselors, and they give you like a background of them. Their name, where they went to school, license number, and what their expertise is. So I know one of your questions is if someone is looking for a marriage counselor, should that counselor be married? Well, not necessarily. You would just need to get someone that's a licensed marriage and family therapist. So for example, you couldn't come to me for marriage counseling because I'm not a licensed marriage and that's a specialty.
Okay.
So they have the background, they have the components that they need to help you and your family get through any transition. So that's where you would go for family therapy as well.
And how, from your perspective, do you define success with therapy? Like, what does that look like? So if I'm going, are there certain things that I'm looking for when it comes to acknowledging that therapy is being successful for me?
Okay. So it is. So how therapy works is, I'll give you a little bit of information, is that when you go in, the therapist asks you, what do you want to work on? Now, we may know what you need to work on, but we're not going to tell you that because you may not be there at that point. Some therapy has to go slow and steady. Some therapy can go real fast. It depends on if you have had therapy before. So we ask you, what do you want to work on? And we go from there.
Okay.
So you set your own goals, because we also feel that when you set your own goals, you're willing to do the work, because therapy is not easy. And it's going to be some good days and it's going to be some bad days. So people go to therapy because they want things to change. They're there to make changes, right? So what I would look for in my client is if the behavior that they didn't like has changed, if their mood is better, if they're able to make decisions without help from others, and if they're able to cope better. So that's what I would base effectiveness on.
And does that happen within a certain time frame? Like, is this a 4-week and I'm done? Is it a 6-month and I'm done? Or what is the journey like when you establish that therapy relationship?
So the journey varies because it's all individualized. No two people are the same. And this is, even though we have theories and questioning that we do when we do therapy, because we try to find patterns and help you navigate and make connections and stuff like that. Nobody is the same. So let's say, for example, I had a client who knew that they had been depressed for 2 years, but didn't do anything about it. It's probably going to take them 2 years of therapy.
Really?
If I had to estimate.
Okay.
It can be longer than 2 years. Some people quit after 6 weeks because they're not ready yet. So it just varies.
Okay.
And I always recommend that. It's like, say if someone did therapy I've known people that's been in therapy for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I always suggest to my clients when they come into my program that I work for, is if you've been with that therapist for 5 years, I'm going to ask you to not continue with that therapist. You have to call and do that because it's unethical for me to do. Because after 5 years, the therapeutic relationship is no longer. You may need fresh perspectives and fresh ideas.
Gotcha. And so what if you're in a situation where you want help, but you feel like, or you have asked your spouse, your husband, to go to therapy with you, and he doesn't want to do it? You know, he's not interested in it. And so you kind of feel like a little bit of a loss because you're trying to find solutions for your relationship, but he's not on board. What's your perspective or advice for someone in that situation?
So my perspective is go anyway.
Okay.
Because sometimes we have to be the example.
Okay.
And if you go to therapy and you come back and say it's not as bad as you thought, because it's such a stigma on therapy, as we stated before, it may help change that mindset of your spouse. So that would be my perspective on it. Okay. If no one is getting help in the relationship, I think it will fail.
Right.
So at least one person has to, and you can always go to therapy and share what you've learned and try to do it in the home yourself. And sometimes if they don't want to go to individual therapy, they may go to therapy with you in marriage therapy because they feel more comfortable because you're present. Does that make sense?
It does.
But if you already have an individual therapist, I'm a firm believer that if you go to marriage therapy, you have to have a different therapist because that therapist is already for you. And it wouldn't help the couple stuff.
That was interesting because I know when you and I were talking before, it's almost like keep them separate for all the reasons that you mentioned, right? Which is they're kind of on your side or on your page, and you want to make sure that you bring someone neutral into the perspective. Do you feel, and I know this isn't something we necessarily talked about, so hopefully I don't cut you off guard, but where do you feel like, you know, because there's some people who say, well, I only want a Christian therapist, or I only want a Black therapist. Like, you know, they have these stigmas of certain kinds of people that make a difference. And I heard you say something before, which is there's a certain licensing that comes with that. What's kind of your take for, if I'm assessing to find someone to help us, that they have certain values or that kind of position?
So I always tell my clients, you have to go where you're comfortable. So if that's a Christian therapist, make sure that Christian therapist has a license. Okay. If that's a Black therapist, make sure that outpatient therapist has a license. Because now, if you get there and that therapist feels like she cannot help you, we do refer you somewhere else. Because we don't want you coming and we're not capable of helping with whatever it is you're going through. It would be unethical for us to do so. So I always say, in the African American community, most of us feel as if Caucasian therapists can't understand us. Some of us don't go in there, they go in it with the open mind, saying that we're all trained the same. So I think it's all in their perspective and what they feel comfortable with. Because if you get in there and you and the therapist don't mesh, guess what happens? You shut down and you're not getting the help that you need. So you have to be somewhere where you're comfortable.
Gotcha.
Because it's no benefit to you.
That makes sense. We do have a couple of people who have called in, and I don't know if anyone has a question that they want to ask. We have a few minutes left in this 30-minute segment. If you do have a question, I think that there's a way for you to acknowledge that. Let me see if anyone has a question. They're able to kind of raise their hand or indicate on the phone that they have a question.
Okay.
I don't see it coming through, so I'm just going to continue to allow you to share based on, you know, the list we've been working on together.
Okay.
Give me your perspective on your take as a therapist in helping people, and also your perspective on group therapy as well. And does that fit with personal therapy? Is that something that's beneficial? Like, do you find people learn from one another in those experiences? And then how and when you're sitting in the room and you're working with someone, what's your take as a therapist for if you're making a connection?
So I'll start with the group therapy first.
Okay.
So I haven't never heard, I'm not saying that it's not out there, but I don't think they have group therapy for marriage.
Okay.
So group therapy is for individuals.
Okay.
That may be, so let's say someone goes to the hospital and they're in a crisis. Well, they may be ready to talk about some things, but they're not ready to go to individual therapy. So we will send them to group therapy.
Gotcha.
To open them up and get them more comfortable, then they go to individual therapy. It's like a protocol. Mm-hmm. So I think you asked me like the pros and cons of group therapy. Mm-hmm. So some pros is that you get added support, you get social interaction. So someone with social anxiety, this may or may not be good for them. Mm-hmm. Depends on the person. It gives you a sense of belonging. It's really good for people who don't really have a support system. Mm-hmm. It's less expensive than any other therapy. Mm-hmm. And you get different perspectives. Now, the cons to that is you shut down because of the social anxiety. So if you're quiet, you kind of get looked over in a sense, especially if it's a big group. You may have some personality clashes. You know, you might have someone in the group that likes to take over and nobody else gets time to talk. You may feel uncomfortable. Some members may be aggressive or you don't trust them.
Gotcha.
And what was the next question?
No, you answered them both because it was around marriage therapy and in group settings for that. And you said that it's probably not common to have a group setting for marriage. Yes. It's more common to do it from an individual perspective. All right, so we got 3 minutes left, and I got three questions, three little close-out questions for you. Okay. First of all, Dana, I want to thank you for joining me.
No problem.
I look forward to you joining each month as we bring different topics in. And I've got like 4 or 5 lined up already, and we'll have some guests joining us for those. Okay. But final thoughts on therapy for us as women, wives, in marriage relationships. What do you want to leave us with from your perspective and what we should give consideration to? Being women, being wives, and for our marriages?
Well, I think that being wives come with a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And what I have found personally is that surrounding ourselves with wives that are healthy can help us in the long run. Mm-hmm. You know, just surrounding ourselves with positive people that really, really want their marriage. Also, I think as a wife, individually, as women, we go through certain things as we get older. Mm-hmm. So I think that individual therapy helps with those changes, those mood swings, you know, menopause and other things that we go through as we start to get older. I think that individual therapy with individual therapy, you don't have to always go when something is wrong. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the myths of therapy, but you may go just to get clarification of what's going on and what happened. Like, you know, as we get older, sometimes we can't think, we don't make appropriate decisions, or we make impulsive decisions. Mm-hmm. So it's just going to see why we do the things that we do. Mm-hmm. How was these patterns created? So I always say, as the wife, even as a husband, individual therapy, I think is a great thing. Okay. Some things I wanted to leave you guys with, though, you know, one question that you asked, Denise, was how do we thrive in our marriage? Mm-hmm. Did you want me to answer? Okay.
Go ahead and answer that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the first thing, as I stated earlier, is communication. I believe communication is key. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we throw the word communication around, but there's so many different types of communication. Mm-hmm. And being aware of what those types are will help. So I'll give you 3 of them. So you have passive communication, you have assertive communication, and you have aggressive communication. Those are 3 of the main ones. So knowing that and knowing how your spouse communicate or how you communicate can help in the long run. Just knowing that those 3 bits of information. So being passive is one of the lowest communications that you can have. Being aggressive can get you in a lot of trouble, but being assertive is the healthiest way to communicate. And sometimes some of us have to learn how to be assertive, and that's where therapy comes in, because you can just go to therapy just to learn how to assertively communicate. You have to be trained to assertively communicate. So another one, key point, is build a healthy support system. Support is not always family. Sometimes family can be not so good for us. Seek support from people who are for you. And that could be friend at work, that could be your therapist, that could be someone that you was best friends with years ago. It could be anyone that supports you and you have more than a superficial relationship with. 3 more, continue growing in love. I always say we get so in routine. We work, we have children, we have to take the kids to sports, and we forget about being spontaneous. You know, do things that you would like to do and haven't had a chance to do it just out of the blue. I think that works. It gives your relationship and your marriage a little bit more spice. Next is self-care. Self-care is a big thing now, because you can't pour from an empty cup. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So self-care, when I teach my class at work, I do self-care in 5 dimensions, and that's social, emotional, spiritual, physical. Social, emotional, spiritual, physical, and I'm having a brain fart right now. Sorry. But if you're doing something in all of those areas, that's really good self-care. So that could be things like meditation. That could be aromatherapy. That could be going to get your nails done, your hair done, going shopping, etc. And then it was one more thing about leading a meaningful life. Just like I said earlier, just starting your day with intentions and affirmations. I like to do this exercise where you get a lot of those sticky notes, the colorful kind. Put it by your nightstand. Get up, write you something, and post it on your mirror in the morning, in your bathroom, because we all go to the bathroom in the morning, and you can see intentions from 3 days before. And I think when we have that visual that we can look at, it starts our day in a good way, and anything that comes our way that day, we're able to manage it.
That's awesome. Well, you have shined your light brightly for us, Dana. I really appreciate you.
No problem.
And I think we are just scratching the surface on what you're going to be able to bring to the table for us. And so we will be posting this playback on the First Wives Club website. We are also working on a YouTube channel, and we'll get it out there as well. So I'll make sure I get the link. But Dana, thank you so much, girl. And I can't wait to do this again next month. First Wives Club LoveTalk will be the first Sunday of every month. And so we are absolutely excited about that. And thanks everyone for joining in, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks again, Dana.